Life is not always what it appears to be, where some people experience a glitch in their reality. The following two stories are about two people whose lives took a strange twist, leaving them scratching their heads as to what had happened. Carol's doppelganger. Carol once worked at a dog rescue centre in the Midwest, which employed about 10 people who were all very close to each other. One day, strange things started happening where she felt that someone or something was playing games with her. Everyone believed the place was haunted because they would occasionally hear a female voice talking when nobody else was around, and would also sing. Everybody claimed to have seen apparitions or reflections when nobody was around. Overall, the centre had a strange energy, and then things started to get even weirder. Carol was planning to move to the East Coast, and in the last 2 months working at the rescue centre, even stranger things started to happen. On her days off, her fellow workers started to send her text messages asking her why she was coming to work on her days off, but then suddenly disappeared without saying a word. Carol insisted that she had never been at work that day. Then on the day she was at work, some of the workers would jump away from her in surprise, saying, "How the hell did you get there so quickly? I've just seen you outside as I was looking out of the window." Another said, "How did you get there so fast? I was just in the storage room with you." People were asking her how she managed to get from point A to point B so fast. Carol then gave one crazy example when she was in the backyard where there was only one door in which to enter the premises that went into the adoption room, and from there it was about 50 feet through a hallway into the kitchen and some meeting rooms. As Carol walked in from the outside, she passed a fellow worker who was walking down the hallway. The worker just stared at her and saying, "You can't be here. I just walked past you in the kitchen and you were washing dishes. You should not be here. That's impossible." It was now time for a group meeting because everyone was freaking out as they all claimed that they were seeing a phantom version of Carol. They said that every time they saw her, she had her back to them and never interacted with them. Other workers had spookier stories to tell where they would see her doing strange things like walk into the storeroom, and they would follow her as they wanted to ask her a question about work. But as soon as they walked into the storeroom, she just disappeared. Carol said that she had not walked into the storeroom on that particular time or day. Carol attempted to analyse what had been happening and believed that she'd been creating this other version of herself, as she'd been making major life decisions whether to stay or whether she should take a promotion on the East Coast. The decision she was making was causing her a lot of stress, as she loved her current job and was anxious about whether she should stay or go, which was causing her to make a slip decision, thereby making another version of herself. She stretched her imagination even further, thinking that maybe in another reality she'd decided to stay in the Midwest, whilst the other Carol moved to the East. The two timelines had somehow intersected and glitched into one another. The strangest thing though was that even after Carol had moved away, they continued to see her at work. Future Sam. James considered himself to be a fairly normal 16-year-old who spent far too much time on the computer, but nevertheless had many friends from the popular to the nerdy. One day he met a nerdy kid called Sam, and they shared a particular interest in the same game. His friend Sam was socially awkward and shy, but they got on well together. Sam was a pretty smart kid who had a high IQ, but James found they had a lot in common playing video games, watching YouTube and playing chess. After a short while, they became the best of mates. Normally they planned their visits at each other's house, but on one particular day, James decided to turn up at his house uninvited and thought nothing of it as they were now close friends. As James knocked on the door, an older man of about 40 years old opened it. James thought it was probably Sam's father, as they looked alike, but then James suddenly realised that Sam did not have a father. He then assumed he must have been a relative. James then asked whether Sam was home, and the man laughed and said, Well, he was Sam. James thought it was weird and a strange coincidence, or maybe it was an uncle that Sam had been named after. James said he was looking for a 16-year-old Sam, who he then went on to describe, and the man started to look uneasy. He then said Sam was not at home, and James asked him when he would be at home, and after a few seconds the man gave him a time. James was now confused. Did the man know Sam or not, and why did he seem hesitant? James later returned to the house at the time the man said would be at home, and the 16-year-old Sam answered the door. James told Sam that he'd met his relative with the same name, and Sam replied that he had no such relative with the same name as him. He also told James he'd been at home all day and was there at the time James would have knocked on the door. They both found James' experience very, very strange, and the only explanation was time travel, and James had somehow encountered an older Sam in a future time or another dimension.